All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are tackling a monster of political theory, Jürgen Habermas's Between Facts and Norms. Now, it's a really dense book, but it's all built around one huge question for any modern democracy. How can the law be something we're forced to obey, while at the same time being something we freely accept as right? And this quote right here, it gets to the very core of his answer. What Habermas is saying is, look, we don't live in a world with absolute certainties anymore. They're not handed down from religion or ancient tradition. So for our laws to have any real authority, the process we use to create them, the way we reason together, has to constantly be tested, questioned, and justified right out in the open for everyone to see.
Think about it like this. The law obviously has teeth, right? If you break the speed limit, you get a ticket, you have to pay it. That's a cold, hard fact, and it's backed by the power of the state. But for society to not just feel like a giant prison, we also have to believe deep down that the laws are generally fair and just. We have to want to accept them. So how on earth does modern law pull off this incredible balancing act?
To really get to Habermas's brilliant solution, we first have to understand these two faces of law he talks about. This is the central tension that gives the book its name, the tug-of-war between what he calls facticity and validity. So first up is facticity. This is the facts part of the title. It's the law as this brute social reality. It's written down in law books, it's enforced by police officers and judges, and it makes us behave a certain way, usually through the threat of punishment. It's the simple, undeniable reality that the law is. And then on the other side, you've got validity. This is the norms part. Validity is the law's big claim that it actually deserves our respect. It's the idea that a law is legitimate because it's based on good reasons, because it's just, and because we should follow it. Not because we're scared, but because we rationally agree with it.
And here, you can really see that push and pull. Facticity comes from pure state power, and it just asks one question. Is it enforced? But validity, that comes from our rational acceptance, and it asks a totally different question. Is it right? A legal system that only has facticity, well, that's just tyranny. And a system that only has validity, that's just a bunch of nice ideas with no teeth. Modern law has to be both.
Okay, so how have thinkers throughout history tried to solve this problem? Habermas basically sees it as this huge debate between two major schools of thought. And each one tends to lean too far to one side of this tension. So on one side of the ring, you've got the classic liberal model. Thinkers like John Locke are the big names here. This view basically argues that the number one job of the law is to protect our individual rights, rights that we already have. And the main challenger to that idea is what's called the Republican model. This is championed by people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and it puts all the emphasis on our collective power as a people to govern ourselves. When you put them side by side like this, the difference just pops. For the liberal view, the big value is human rights, so freedom is all about freedom from the state getting in your business. But for the Republican view, the core value is self-governance, so freedom is the freedom to participate in making the rules of the state. And this whole setup leads to what Habermas thinks is a totally false choice. Do we really have to pick? Are our individual freedoms fundamentally at war with our collective power to rule ourselves? Is it one or the other? Habermas's answer is a huge, resounding no. And this is where he brings it all together with his really powerful synthesis. He offers a solution he calls proceduralism, and it's designed to finally resolve this centuries-old conflict. Okay, this is the absolute key to the whole thing. He calls it co-originality. Private autonomy, that's our individual rights, and public autonomy, our democratic power. They aren't enemies at all. They're actually two sides of the same coin. You literally cannot have one without the other. I mean, think about it. How can you have a real democracy without protecting individual rights like free speech? And what good are your individual rights if you don't have the collective political power to actually define them and make them into law? So what connects them? What's the bridge? It's this. The discourse principle. This is the engine of the entire theory. It says a law is legitimate not because some king said so, but only if everyone who's affected by it could, in theory, agree to it after an open, rational debate. A debate where the only thing that wins is the better argument. So let's just trace how this actually works, step by step. It all starts out there, in the public, in coffee shops, on the news, in our everyday conversations. All of this talk generates what Habermas calls communicative power. Then, this power, the force of reasoned public opinion, flows into the formal political system. Parliaments, elections, courts, and so on. That's what creates legitimate law.
and only then does the state's administrative power kick in to enforce it. The most important thing to see here is the flow. Power moves from the citizens' conversations upwards.
Let's zoom in on that one key ingredient, because it's really the engine of this whole machine. This unique idea of communicative power. Now, this is not the kind of power that comes from a police officer's badge or from a billionaire's wallet. No, communicative power is this special force that just emerges when free and equal citizens convince each other with good reasons. It's the power of a shared we that's built through discussion, not through force.
Habermas actually borrows this idea from another great political thinker, Hannah Arendt, and this quote just captures it perfectly. Communicative power isn't something you can bottle up or save for later. It exists only in that moment when people come together to talk and act as one. It's fragile, it's dynamic, and it is the only true source of democratic legitimacy. So what's the big takeaway here? Why does all this dense theory matter? Well, first, it means that the legitimacy of our laws isn't something fixed or handed down from on high. It's an ongoing project that we, as citizens, have to constantly create through talk. And that means, second, that the health of our public sphere, the quality of our debates, directly shapes the quality of our laws. Third, this whole idea gives us a powerful tool to critique our own politics. We can ask, are our laws based on reason or just on raw power and money? And finally, it puts something really simple but profound at the absolute center of a healthy democracy: communication.
And that leaves us with a really tough and maybe even urgent question for our time. If legitimate law really does depend on a healthy, rational public conversation, what happens when that public space gets shattered by misinformation, by filter bubbles, by just raw political polarization? Can our talks still create legitimate law? That is the challenge that Habermas's incredible theory leaves for us to face.